In the middle of a hot, ordinary lunch hour, a mud-streaked puppy won't move, barking like he's warning the whole street. A tired grocery clerk stops. A quiet first responder slows his truck. And then phones buzz with an alert. And everything changes. A dented white car. A chemical smell. A scrap of something no one's supposed to notice. Doors that should stay open start to close. The puppy won't quit. He drags them toward a place built to hide things, where the air hums and the walls feel wrong. What is this little dog trying to say? And when the truth finally hits, will they get there in time? Or is the heartbreak already behind the wall? The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the busy street, making the air shimmer above the hot asphalt. Cars inched forward in the usual lunch rush, their drivers growing more impatient by the minute, honking horns and muttering curses behind closed windows. Rhea Calder glanced at her watch and sighed. Her break at the grocery store had officially ended 5 minutes ago. The plastic name tag pinned to her faded blue uniform shirt felt heavier than usual in the oppressive heat. That's when she spotted the puppy. It darted between cars, covered in reddish-brown mud that matted its fur into clumps, leaving dirty paw prints on the baking pavement. But what caught her attention wasn't its disheveled appearance, it was its behavior. The little dog planted itself firmly in front of a white sedan, barking with surprising ferocity for its size, its tiny body rigid with determination. "Hey, buddy," Rhea called out softly, taking a step toward the puppy, her heart clenching at the thought of it getting hit. "You can't stay in the road. It's not safe." The dog glanced at her, intelligent eyes meeting hers for just a second, but quickly returned its attention to the car, hackles raised, a continuous growl rumbling from its small chest. The white sedan's window rolled down with an electrical whir that cut through the ambient traffic noise. A man in his early 40s leaned out, his neat hair slicked back, and an expensive watch glinting on his wrist, catching the sunlight in a way that momentarily blinded Rhea. Despite his polished appearance, something about his unshaven face made Rhea uneasy, a disconnect between the careful grooming and the neglected stubble that shadowed his jaw. "Would you get that stray out of here?" he snapped, his fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening with each tap. "Some of us have places to be." His voice carried an edge that seemed disproportionate to the inconvenience. Rhea stepped closer to the puppy, noticing how it trembled despite its brave stance. Sweat trickled down her back as she crouched slightly, trying to appear non-threatening to the frightened animal. "I'm trying," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the man's hostility. "Just give me a minute." The man, who she would later learn was Vince Lawton, revved his engine slightly, inching the car forward with a threatening rumble. The puppy jumped back but didn't run away, continuing to bark at the sedan's right rear side, where Rhea noticed a significant dent in the otherwise pristine vehicle. The metal was crumpled inward, the paint scratched away to reveal the gray beneath, as if it had recently collided with something, or someone. Just then, a chorus of electronic pings filled the air as multiple phones in the surrounding cars went off simultaneously, creating an eerie electronic symphony. Rhea pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen hot from sitting in the sun, seeing an emergency alert flash across the screen. Her heart seemed to stop as she read the message, each word hitting her like a physical blow. Amber Alert, missing child, Toby Wells. Age 8, last seen, Morton Street area, possible vehicle, white sedan with damage to right rear. If seen, call 911 immediately. Rhea's head snapped up, her gaze moving from the message to the white sedan with its telling dent. The driver was staring at her through the window, his expression unreadable but his eyes suddenly alert, calculating. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something in his gaze made her blood run cold. a flatness, a coldness that seemed to assess her as merely an obstacle. The puppy's barking took on a new meaning. No longer was this a simple traffic nuisance. The dog's desperate behavior felt like a warning, an alarm that something was terribly wrong. Ria's hands began to shake as she looked more closely at the sedan, trying to peer through the tinted back windows. Was there movement inside? A small shadow? The dark glass revealed nothing but reflected her own worried face back at her. The driver's patience suddenly snapped. "Move!" he shouted, his composed facade cracking to reveal something ugly beneath. He revved the engine again, the sound aggressive and threatening. The puppy darted to the sidewalk, its courage finally giving way to fear, and the sedan accelerated through the gap in traffic, leaving behind the acrid smell of burning rubber as it turned sharply at the next corner. Ria stood frozen on the street, her grocery store name tag fluttering in the hot breeze. Her ordinary day had shattered into something unrecognizable. The mundane frustration of running late from her break seemed ridiculous now, replaced by a growing sense of dread that settled in her stomach like a stone. Around her, the world continued as normal. Cars moved forward, pedestrians crossed at the light, all unaware of what might have just happened. She watched the white sedan disappear around the corner, her mind racing with possibilities and fears she couldn't quite form into coherent thoughts. The puppy whimpered from the sidewalk, still staring in the direction the car had gone, its small body quivering. Its mud-caked fur, she realized, wasn't just mud. There were traces of red clay, the distinctive rust-colored dirt from construction sites, and abandoned lots on the edge of town where children were warned not to play. Looking down at her phone again, she read the alert one more time. 8 years old. Just a child. The image of the driver's cold eyes and the way he'd been so desperate to leave made her stomach turn, bile rising in her throat. The way the puppy had focused on the back of the car, not the driver. What had seemed like an ordinary traffic incident now felt like something far more sinister, a crucial moment she couldn't ignore, a thread that, if pulled, might unravel something terrible but necessary to face. With trembling fingers, Ria dialed 911. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat, a frantic rhythm that matched her racing thoughts. She waited through 2 agonizing rings before a dispatcher finally answered, each second stretching like taffy. 911, what's your emergency? The voice was crisp, professional. I think I just saw the car from the Amber Alert, Ria said, trying to keep her voice steady even as her knees felt weak beneath her. The white sedan with the dent. It was just here on Madison Avenue, right in front of the pharmacy. Did you get a license plate number? The desk sergeant's voice had shifted from urgent to weary, the change as obvious as a door slamming shut. No, Ria's voice faltered, her confidence wavering under the dismissal she could already sense coming. It happened so fast, but the dent matched exactly, and there was this dog, this puppy that seemed desperate, like it was trying to get help. Ma'am, we're getting dozens of calls about white sedans, the sergeant cut in, not bothering to mask his impatience. Without a plate number or more specific details, there's not much we can do. Every 3rd car in this county is a white sedan. If you see the vehicle again, try to get the plate number and call us back. Before Ria could protest, she felt a tug on her sleeve. Insistent, deliberate. The mud-covered puppy had its teeth gently clamped on her grocery store uniform, pulling her back toward the curb where Vince's car had been idling minutes before. Its eyes, dark and liquid, seemed to plead with her. Please. Ria tried one last time, her voice taking on a desperate edge. Something feels really wrong about this. The driver looked nervous, suspicious. The way he was watching me. We'll add your report to the others, the sergeant said firmly, cutting her off. Call back if you have more information. The line went dead with an abrupt click that felt like a slap. Rhea stared at her phone in frustration, the screen dimming in her hand. The weight of being dismissed, again, settled on her shoulders like a familiar, unwelcome coat. But the puppy kept tugging insistently, tiny teeth refusing to let go of her sleeve. Okay, what is it?" she muttered, following the dog's lead despite herself. As they reached the spot where the sedan had stopped, a sharp chemical smell hit her, nostrils, acrid and artificial. It wasn't the usual car exhaust or oil leak that occasionally stained the street. This was different, more like cleaning supplies but harsher, with a sweet undertone that made her head swim slightly. The puppy was pawing frantically at something in the gutter. A dirty white rag that seemed to be the source of the smell, edges darkened with grime, but center still damp with whatever had soaked it. Rhea pulled a crumpled napkin from her pocket and carefully picked up the rag, holding it at arm's length. The chemical odor was even stronger up close, making her eyes water and her nose burn. Something about it made her skin crawl with instinctive revulsion. Why would a rag soaked in cleaning chemicals be in a car with a nervous driver? It didn't add up unless... She pushed away the dark thought forming and wrapped the rag carefully in the napkin, folding it several times before tucking it into her pocket. The puppy whined, a high, pained sound, drawing her attention to its paws. They were raw and red, crusted with dried blood in places, as if the poor thing had been running on hot pavement for hours without rest. But there was something else disturbing. Sticky residue matted in its fur, especially around its legs and neck. The fur was missing in patches, leaving bald spots that looked painful and irritated. Rhea knew exactly who to call. She pulled out her phone again and dialed Colt Merrick, her neighbor who worked as a paramedic. If anyone would know what to make of this strange collection of clues, it would be him. His steady competence had been her anchor many times before, though usually for more mundane emergencies. "Colt, are you on shift?" she asked when he answered, his deep voice instantly calming her frazzled nerves. "Just finished, actually. What's up, Rhea?" She could hear the exhaustion in his tone, but also the immediate attention he always gave her. "I need your help. Can you meet me on Madison, near the drugstore, and maybe bring your first aid kit? There's a puppy here that's hurt, and something else. Something I think might be important about that missing boy." 10 minutes later, Colt's familiar pickup pulled up to the curb, the faded blue paint and slight ding in the fender as recognizable to Rhea as her own reflection. He stepped out, his broad shoulders and calm presence making Rhea feel more grounded already. The lines of exhaustion etched around his hazel eyes from his 12-hour shift faded as she quickly explained the situation, her words tumbling out in an urgent stream. Colt crouched down beside the puppy, who surprisingly didn't shy away from his gentle, practiced hands. "Hey there, little guy," he murmured, examining the raw paws with the same careful attention he gave to human patients. "You've been through something rough, haven't you?" His expression grew increasingly serious as he parted the matted fur around the dog's neck and legs, fingers probing with careful precision. "This isn't just mud," he said quietly, voice dropping to the tone he used when delivering bad news. "There's adhesive residue here. Looks like duct tape. And these marks..." He pointed to some thin abrasions that circled the puppy's legs like bracelets of pain. "This pup was restrained, Rhea. He chewed himself free. See these tooth marks in the fur? He was desperate enough to hurt himself to get away." Rhea's throat tightened, a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. The chemical smell on that rag. Could it be something used to knock someone out? Like chloroform or something? The words felt ridiculous coming out of her mouth. Too much like a TV crime show. But the evidence in front of her was all too real. Colt's jaw clenched, a muscle working in his cheek. Could be. Some cleaning products can be used that way in high enough concentrations. Professional grade stuff, not your average household cleaner. He kept his voice steady, but Rhea could see the concern darkening his eyes. Rhea, this isn't looking good. This goes beyond a random stray dog. She glanced at her phone. She was now 30 minutes late returning from break. Her boss would be furious, probably writing her up for the 3rd time this month. Her already precarious job would be hanging by an even thinner thread. But the image of that white sedan, the driver's cold eyes that had slid over her like she was nothing, and now this evidence of something truly sinister. She couldn't just go back to stocking shelves and scanning groceries while these pieces lay scattered before her. The puppy stood up with visible effort, shaking off some dried mud that fell to the sidewalk in tiny clumps. Despite its injuries, it took a few determined steps in the direction the sedan had gone, then looked back at Rhea expectantly, ears perked forward in a silent question. "You're not thinking of following this dog, are you?" Colt asked, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. He ran a hand through his dark blonde hair, concern battling with the loyalty that had always defined him. "That sergeant wouldn't listen," Rhea said, her usual self-doubt transforming into something stronger, more resolute. Purpose. Her spine straightened as she made her decision. "But this dog, he's trying to show us something. I know how crazy that sounds, but look at him. He's desperate. And there's a little boy out there somewhere who's been missing for 18 hours now. What if everyone's looking in the wrong places?" She squared her shoulders, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. The grocery store would have to manage without her. Right now she had something more important to do than worry about her job or what her ex-husband would say about her being flaky again. The puppy wagged its tail once, a quick, hopeful motion, as if approving her choice, then started limping determinedly down the street, stopping every few steps to make sure they were following. The puppy limped ahead, nose to the ground, leading them past a row of small businesses. Despite its injuries, determination drove each step. The animal's paws left faint, reddish marks on the sidewalk, but it pressed on with singular focus. Rhea and Colt followed close behind, pausing at each storefront to ask if anyone had seen a white sedan with rear-end damage. The afternoon sun beat against their necks as they moved from door to door, hope dimming with each negative response. "Hold him still," Colt said softly as they approached a woman sweeping outside her salon. The puppy was trembling, clearly anxious but fighting to stay focused. Its ribs expanded and contracted with rapid breaths, eyes darting nervously between passing cars. Rhea knelt beside him, steadying him with gentle hands, while Colt showed the woman a rough sketch he'd made of the car. His paramedic's hands had drawn the details with surprising precision, the dent, the particular shape of the taillights. "Sorry, lots of white cars today," the stylist said with a shrug, leaning on her broom. "Can't say I noticed any dents. Poor little thing, though. What happened to him?" She reached toward the puppy, who shrank back against Rhea's legs. "We're not entirely sure," Rhea answered, feeling the animal's warmth against her calf. "But we think he might help us find someone important." They moved on, stopping at a phone repair shop, a sandwich place, and a dollar store. Each time, the puppy grew more agitated, whining and pulling at the makeshift leash Colt had fashioned from his belt. The leather, worn smooth from years of use, slipped in Rhea's sweaty palm as the dog strained forward. "Easy there, buddy," Rhea soothed, though her own nerves were starting to fray. Her grocery clerk's uniform clung to her back, dark patches of sweat forming between her shoulder blades. The afternoon heat beat down mercilessly as they approached Jerry's Gas and Go on the corner. The rundown station had clearly seen better days, its faded sign barely readable, paint peeling off in long strips. The concrete was stained with decades of oil spills, and the air smelled of gasoline and hot asphalt. The puppy suddenly went rigid, a low growl rumbling in its chest. The sound seemed to vibrate up through the makeshift leash and into Ria's arm. The dog's muddy fur bristled along its spine. That's when they saw it. The white sedan pulled up to pump number 3. The dented rear bumper caught the sunlight, confirming what they already knew in their gut. Vince was outside his car, receipt in hand, when he spotted them. For a moment, everything froze. His eyes widened with recognition, darting between Ria, Colt, and especially the mud-streaked puppy that was now barking frantically. His unshaven jaw tightened, the facade of respectability slipping to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. "Hey," Colt called out, already moving, his broad shoulders tensed as he crossed the lot with purposeful strides. "We need to talk to you." But Vince was faster. He dove into his car, engine roaring to life with an aggressive snarl. The door slammed shut with a metallic thunk that echoed across the gas station lot. Ria broke into a sprint without thinking, adrenaline erasing any hesitation. Her practical work shoes slapped against the pavement as her heart hammered in her chest. She heard Colt's heavy footfalls as he cut across the lot, trying to block the sedan's escape route. His paramedic's instincts had him moving with practiced urgency, calculating angles and timing like he would at an emergency scene. The puppy, despite its raw paws, lunged forward with shocking speed. Its teeth found the sedan's chrome bumper just as Vince threw the car into reverse. The force of the movement sent something fluttering from the partially open door, a piece of paper that drifted to the cracked pavement like a wounded butterfly. The puppy yelped as it was thrown aside, but immediately scrambled back to its feet. "Stop!" Ria shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. Her freckled face flushed red with exertion and fury. But Vince was already shifting to drive, his expensive watch glinting as he gripped the steering wheel. Colt reached the car first, grabbing for the door handle with fingers that had pulled countless people from wrecked vehicles. Vince's fist shot out through the window, catching Colt square in the jaw. The paramedic stumbled back, hazel eyes momentarily unfocused, as the sedan's tires squealed against asphalt. In seconds, the car had peeled out onto the main road, leaving behind nothing but the acrid smell of burned rubber and a cloud of exhaust that hung in the humid air. The puppy was already nosing at the fallen paper, whining urgently. Its paws danced with impatience as Ria knelt down. She snatched it up, a receipt from Ravenside Storage, Unit 114, marked as a day pass. The timestamp was from just 2 hours ago. The ink was still fresh, barely smudged by its brief contact with the ground. "You okay?" she asked Colt, who was working his jaw carefully, fingers probing for damage along his stubbled face. "I'll live," he said, though his voice was tight with pain. A red mark was already blooming where Vince had struck him. "What did you find?" He moved closer, his solid presence steadying her racing thoughts. Ria quickly snapped a photo of the receipt with her phone, sending it to the 911 dispatch number as an update to her earlier report. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed a brief explanation. "Ravenside Storage," she said, showing Colt the paper. "He was there this morning. There's an address printed at the bottom. It's about 20 minutes from here." The puppy's tail wagged once, decisively, as if confirming they were on the right track. Its eyes were fixed in the direction of Ravenside Storage, with an intensity that left no room for doubt. Despite exhaustion and injury, the small animal seemed to radiate a fierce determination that matched the growing resolve in Ria's tired blue eyes. Ria and Colt exchanged a look. The connection between them deepened in that silent moment. Two ordinary people bound by extraordinary circumstances, They both knew where they needed to go next. No words were necessary as Colt nodded, his calm reliability grounding Ria's racing thoughts into focused determination. Ria's fingers trembled as she dialed 911 again, the receipt clutched in her other hand so tightly that the paper crinkled at the edges. The sweat of her palm threatened to smudge the ink containing their only lead. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, professional but distant, the practiced tone of someone who'd heard everything and been moved by little. 911, what's your emergency? This is Ria Calder again? About the white sedan and missing child? She fought to keep her voice steady, swallowing the knot of anxiety that threatened to choke her words. We found a receipt from Ravenside Storage, Unit 114. The driver was there just 2 hours ago. There could be... She caught herself before saying more, uncertain what exactly they might find. A pause stretched between them, then, "We'll send a car to check it out." The words hung flat in the air. Something in the dispatcher's tone made Ria's stomach sink, a cold feeling spreading from her core outward. She recognized that particular brand of vague reassurance, the kind that meant they'd get around to it eventually, after the drunk drivers and domestic disturbances that filled the police blotter on a typical summer evening. "How soon?" she pressed, unable to mask the urgency in her voice. Every minute felt precious now, each second ticking away another opportunity to find the child. "As soon as a unit becomes available, ma'am." Translation: not a priority. Colt, still rubbing his jaw from the punch he'd taken earlier, a purple bruise already blooming beneath his stubbled skin, gestured toward his ambulance parked nearby. The white and red vehicle seemed to glow under the parking lot lights. "Come on," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with steady resolve. "We can't wait." The puppy needed no encouragement, practically dragging them toward the rig, his nails scraping against the asphalt, ears perked forward as if sensing their destination. Colt helped lift him into the passenger area, careful of his raw paws that left tiny smudges of blood on the uniform shirt. Ria climbed in after, settling the dog against her while Colt took the driver's seat, his large hands gripping the wheel with practiced ease. The storage facility was only 10 minutes away, but each mile felt like an eternity. They drove in tense silence, broken only by the puppy's occasional whimpers and the crackle of the ambulance radio. Ravenside Storage was a sprawling complex of concrete buildings divided by chain-link fences, stark and imposing under the darkening sky. Security, lights cast long shadows between rows of identical metal doors. They pulled into the main office lot, where a sign advertised 24-hour security in faded red letters that had long since lost their promise of protection. Inside, they found Inez Halford behind a desk cluttered with rental agreements and facility maps, a half-eaten sandwich pushed to one side, and a mug of coffee gone cold. The fluorescent lighting overhead cast harsh shadows across her lined face as she peered at them over reading glasses, taking in Colt's paramedic uniform with its official patches, Ria's grocery store name tag still pinned to her shirt from her abandoned shift, and the injured puppy cradled between them, trembling but determined. "Can I help you?" Her tone suggested she'd rather not, the words coming out weary from what had clearly been a long day already. "We need to check Unit 114, Ria said, sliding the receipt across the desk, watching as Inez's eyes flicked down to it. "It's important. It might be an emergency." Inez barely glanced at it, pushing it back with one finger as though it carried something contagious. "Policy's clear as day. Posted right there." She pointed to a laminated sign on the wall. "No access to rented units without the renter present or a warrant. Period. I don't make exceptions." "Ma'am," Colt stepped forward, his calm paramedic voice in full effect. the same tone he likely used to soothe accident victims and frightened families. "Look at this dog's paws." He gestured to the raw, bleeding patches that left small stains on Ria's jeans. "See the adhesive residue in his fur? Someone tied him up and he chewed himself free. The man who rented that unit was spotted near where a child went missing today." The manager's expression flickered, a momentary crack in her professional armor. She picked up the receipt, studying the timestamp with more attention now, her finger tracing the numbers. "Please," Ria added softly, leaning forward to make eye contact. "We're not asking to break into the unit, just let us look around. The puppy might lead us somewhere important. Someone's child is out there." Her voice broke on the last word. Inez removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose where red marks showed years of the same gesture. She glanced between them, assessing, weighing policy against conscience. "I can't open the unit," she said finally, with the weariness of someone who'd bent rules before and paid for it. "But I can escort you through the common areas. That's within policy. Nothing more." She grabbed a ring of keys and a walkie-talkie from a drawer, leading them out a side door into the maze of storage buildings. The summer heat had turned the narrow corridors into concrete ovens, the day's warmth still radiating from the walls even as night approached. Their footsteps echoed off metal doors as they followed the puppy, who pulled against the makeshift leash with surprising strength, his nose working frantically against the ground. Ria's police training kicked in, the kind learned from too many crime shows, maybe, but better than nothing in a moment like this. She noted the security cameras mounted at corridor intersections, mentally marking which ones might have caught the white sedan. Some had blinking red lights. Others seemed dormant, possibly broken. Emergency exits were labeled with large red letters, some doors propped slightly open by residents ignoring facility rules. She counted turns. Right, left, another right, mapping their route in her head in case they needed to find their way out quickly. The building numbers ascended steadily through the labyrinth. 98 with its dented corner. 102 marked by graffiti that maintenance had tried and failed to remove. 110 with a padlock twice the size of the others. The puppy's nose never left the ground, but his path was anything but random. He moved with purpose, occasionally lifting his head to test the air before continuing, following some scent only he could detect through the hot, still air that smelled of metal, concrete, and the faint mustiness of forgotten possessions. His determination made Ria's heart ache. Whatever he was tracking, it clearly mattered to him. She wondered if the dog somehow understood the stakes better than they did. Inez walked slightly behind them, walkie-talkie clutched tight in fingers that showed the beginnings of arthritis, watching their progress with a mixture of concern and professional caution. The click of her sensible shoes added a steady rhythm to their tense procession, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. "The 100-teen units are just ahead," she said, gesturing to where the corridor branched again, her voice echoing slightly against the metal doors. "There are premium units, climate-controlled." She offered the information automatically, like a tour guide who couldn't help but recite facts. Ria noticed Colt scanning their surroundings with the same careful attention she was giving it. His earlier easy manner had hardened into something more vigilant, his paramedic's eyes that had seen too many tragedies now looking for signs of a fresh one. The muscles in his jaw worked beneath the bruise forming there. Whatever they were walking into, at least they were both taking it seriously. His presence behind her felt reassuring, solid, a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. The puppy suddenly picked up speed, straining so hard against the leash that Ria had to jog to keep up, her heart pounding in her ears. The dog's nails scrabbled against the concrete, his whole body vibrating with purpose. They rounded the final corner, the sound of their footsteps bouncing off the walls, and the dog's whole body went rigid, pointing like a compass needle toward Unit 114. He let out a soft whine, part recognition, part warning, that made the hair on Ria's arms stand up. The puppy's nails clicked frantically against the concrete floor as he dragged them down the fluorescent-lit hallway. The overhead lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel more ominous. When they reached Unit 114, the dog began scratching at the metal door with such desperation that his already raw paws started bleeding again. "Easy, boy," Ria whispered, her heart pounding. She looked at Inez, who stood rigid with keys in hand. "I can open the hallway security latch," Inez said slowly, "but that's all policy allows without proper authorization." Colt nodded. "That's all we're asking for right now." With precise movements, Inez selected a key and approached the outer lock. The mechanism clicked, and she pulled the hallway latch. The sound echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. Ria grabbed the handle and yanked upward. The metal door rattled as it rose, the grinding noise setting her teeth on edge. Stale air rushed out, carrying with it an acrid chemical smell that made her eyes water. "That's industrial adhesive," Colt said quietly, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a space about 10 feet deep. Moving blankets were piled in one corner, dark stains spread across their surface. Strips of duct tape lay scattered on the floor, some wadded into balls, others stretched out like silver snakes. A blue cooler sat against the wall, lid partially open. Ria's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. The blankets, the tape, the cooler. She tried to steady herself, to think like a professional documenting a crime scene, rather than someone whose worst fears were being confirmed. "The police need to see this," she said, sending the images to 911 with a text. "Unit 114, Ravenside Storage, evidence of kidnapping." She added the exact address for good measure. The puppy, who had been so determined to lead them here, now refused to cross the threshold. He planted his feet firmly in the hallway, whining high in his throat. His eyes were fixed on the back wall of the unit, and his whole body trembled. "What is it, boy?" Ria knelt beside him, following his gaze. The wall looked solid enough, but something about his reaction made her skin crawl. Inez had backed away several steps, her professional demeanor cracking. "I've seen a lot of strange things in these units over the years," she said, voice tight. "But this isn't right." The chemical smell grew stronger as they stood there, making Ria's head spin. It wasn't just glue. There was something else underneath, something that reminded her of hospitals and cleaning supplies. Colt moved his light methodically across the space, his paramedic training evident in his systematic approach. "The blankets are fresh," he noted. "No dust, and that cooler—" He trailed off, but they all understood. A cooler meant supplies. Supplies meant planning. Planning meant wherever Toby Wells was. Now, this was just a stopping point. The puppy's whining grew more intense, his eyes never leaving that back wall. He pawed at the ground as if trying to dig through solid concrete, leaving small, bloody prints behind. Ria felt sick. The empty unit somehow felt worse than finding something terrible. Because emptiness meant movement. Movement meant they were behind, trying to catch up to someone who had already thought several steps ahead. Every minute they spent here was another minute that White Sedan could be putting distance between them and a frightened 8-year-old boy. She took more photos, trying to capture every detail, the way the blankets were folded, the particular pattern of the tape on the floor, the exact position of the cooler. Details that might mean nothing, or might mean everything to the right investigator. "The cameras," she said suddenly, turning to Inez. "Do you have footage of when he accessed this unit?" "Office computer has the last 24 hours, Inez confirmed. Her face had hardened into determination, policy concerns apparently overridden by the reality of what they were seeing. "We should check it now." But before they could move, the puppy let out a sharp bark that echoed off the walls. He was still staring at that back wall, his posture rigid with alertness. Whatever had happened in this unit, whatever trail they were following, the dog seemed convinced that Wall was important. Rhea crouched next to him, running a gentle hand over his trembling shoulders. "What are you trying to tell us, buddy?" she whispered. "What do you know?" The emptiness of Unit 114 loomed behind them, full of implications none of them wanted to face. The clock wasn't just ticking, it was racing, and they were already behind. The first tremor caught them off guard, a deep vibration through the concrete that made the fluorescent lights overhead shiver. Then came the sound, a mechanical groan that echoed through the corridors, followed by the thunderous cascade of rolling gates slamming down in sequence. The main lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness for a heart-stopping moment before dim emergency lighting sputtered to life, casting everything in an eerie red glow. "What's happening?" Inez rushed to the hallway door, yanking the handle. "This shouldn't be possible. The emergency systems are on a separate circuit." "Someone cut the power," Colt said grimly. "Both main and backup." Heavy footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor. A massive figure emerged from the shadows, a burly man with a shaved head and a long scar along his jawline. He wore work boots and clothes stained with paint and chemicals. Rhea recognized the look, the kind of contractor who cleaned out foreclosed properties. "Briggs Hanlon," he announced with a mock bow. "And you folks are somewhere you really shouldn't be." Movement caught Rhea's eye. Up at the window of the control room, Vince's silhouette appeared. He was shouting something, but his words were muffled by the glass. Briggs moved with surprising speed for his size, shouldering past them to jam something into the hallway door mechanism. The metal prongs twisted with a screech, effectively trapping them in the corridor. "Don't worry about making noise," he said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Nobody hears anything over the highway anyway. Place was built right next to it for a reason." The puppy growled, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Rhea's bones. She shifted, angling her body to keep him behind her. His paws were still raw from whatever he'd escaped from. She wouldn't let him get hurt again. Colt moved subtly, positioning himself in a defensive stance. His paramedic training included dealing with violent patients. Rhea could see him assessing angles, distances, potential weapons. "Listen," Colt said, voice steady and professional. "Whatever's going on here, it's not too late to make better choices. The police are already on their way." Briggs laughed, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. "Are they? Because from what I heard, they've been giving you the runaround all day. Probably still are. Lots of missing kid reports turn out to be nothing, right?" Rhea's phone felt heavy in her pocket. Those pictures she'd sent to 911. Had anyone even looked at them yet? The dispatcher's vague promise of sending a car seemed very thin now. Inez had backed against the wall, her face pale in the red emergency lighting. "My staff, they'll notice something's wrong." "Already handled," Briggs cut her off. "Amazing what a fake gas leak report can do. Place is evacuated, streets blocked off. Very official looking, very by the book." The reality of their situation settled over Rhea like ice water. They were trapped in a concrete maze with two men who had already proven they were capable of taking a child. No one was coming to help. No one even knew they needed help. The puppy pressed against her legs, trembling but still growling. He'd led them here for a reason, had somehow known they needed to find this place. Now they were caught in the same trap he'd escaped from. "Here's how this goes," Briggs said, cracking his knuckles. "You're going to tell me exactly what you think you know, what you've told anyone else, and who else might come looking. Then we'll discuss how cooperative you're feeling about forgetting everything you've seen today." The threat hung in the air, made more menacing by its vagueness. Ria's mind raced. They needed a plan, needed to buy time, needed to find a way out. But the corridor stretched empty in both directions. The doors were sealed, and their only company was a man who looked like he solved most problems with his fists. Above them, Vince's shadow paced behind the control room glass like a caged animal. Whatever plan they'd had was unraveling, and Ria could see panic making him erratic. That could be dangerous. Scared people made desperate choices. Colt shifted his weight, drawing Briggs's attention. "How about we start with you telling us where Toby Wells is?" Briggs's face darkened. "How about you worry more about where you're going to be if you don't shut up?" The puppy's growl grew louder, and Ria felt the vibration of it travel up her legs. She remembered how he'd stared at that back wall in Unit 114, how he'd tried to tell them something. Whatever secrets this place held, they were still here. And now they were trapped with them. The emergency lights cast deep shadows in the concrete hallway, turning familiar shapes strange and threatening. Ria could feel her heart pounding, could hear the distant rush of highway traffic that would drown out any call for help. Their survival now depended entirely on their wits, their nerve, and whatever opportunity they could create. Ria's attention kept drifting back to the puppy's earlier behavior. Even with Briggs looming over them, she couldn't shake how insistently the dog had focused on that back wall in Unit 114. There had been something desperate in his whining, his relentless pawing at the drywall. "I need to check something," she whispered to Colt, her mind racing. "Keep him talking." While Colt engaged Briggs in tense conversation about the fake gas leak, Ria edged closer to Unit 114's entrance. The puppy followed, his nails clicking softly on the concrete floor. Her hands trembled as she pressed her ear against the cool drywall, holding her breath to listen. At first, there was nothing, just the distant rumble of highway traffic. Then, so faint she almost missed it, a sound. Tap, 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 regular, deliberate. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Hello?" she called out softly, barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" Silence stretched for 3 endless seconds. Then the tapping resumed, faster now, more urgent. It wasn't random noise, it was a pattern, a child's pattern, tentative but clear, like a secret code tapped out during a game of hide-and-seek. Ria pressed her palm flat against the wall, feeling the vibration of the taps. That's when she noticed something else, a steady hum of moving air. She followed it to its source, a large HVAC vent near the floor. The sound of circulating air would mask any noise from behind the wall, any calls for help, any crying. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The storage unit itself was a decoy, empty except for evidence of their plans. But behind it, she thought of how these older storage facilities were built, with maintenance crawl spaces between units for access to pipes and electrical systems. The puppy whined softly, pawing at the base of the wall again. Now she understood his desperation, his absolute certainty about this spot. He must have been kept back there too, somehow managed to escape through the vent system and crossed traffic to find help. The map she'd been looking for had been in his panic all along, in his determined pull toward this building. This unit. This wall. "Toby," she whispered against the wall. "If you can hear me, tap twice." 2 clear taps answered her, her vision blurred with tears. The missing boy wasn't gone. He was right here, hidden in an architectural void designed to swallow sound. A space where no one would think to look, where highway noise would drown out any cries for help. The puppy pressed against her legs, his earlier fear replaced with fierce protectiveness. He'd done what he'd set out to do, led them to where Toby was hidden. Now they just had to figure out how to get him out. The wall felt solid under her fingers, but there had to be an access point somewhere. The HVAC vent was too small for a child to fit through. The puppy must have found another way. She ran her hands along the seams of the wall, looking for any sign of a hidden panel or door. Behind her, she could hear Colt keeping Briggs occupied with questions about the building's evacuation procedures. Each second felt precious now, knowing Toby was so close. She had to find a way to let him know help was coming, that they wouldn't leave without him. She tapped out her own pattern. 3 quick taps. Pause. 2 slow ones. After a moment, Toby copied it exactly. The message was clear. He was alert, he understood, he was waiting. The bravery of this 8-year-old boy, staying quiet and hopeful in the dark, made her throat tight with emotion. The puppy suddenly stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Rhea turned to see Briggs watching her with narrowed eyes, his earlier amusement hardening into something dangerous. "What are you doing over there?" he demanded, taking a step toward her. The tapping behind the wall went silent. Even through the concrete and drywall, Rhea could feel the terrified stillness of the child hiding there. She straightened up, placing herself between Briggs and the wall, and met his suspicious glare with steady determination. She knew now, with absolute certainty, what they'd been searching for all along. The puppy had escaped and found her for a reason. He'd led them through traffic, past obstacles, and straight to this spot. Not because he was confused or scared, but because he was trying to save someone who had been kind to him in the dark. The map had never been about places or directions. It had been about a dog's loyalty, a child's courage, and the thin wall between them that wasn't quite thick enough to hide the truth. The urgency of their situation pressed down like a physical weight. They needed a diversion, something loud enough to cover the sound of rescue, chaotic enough to divide attention. Rhea's mind raced through possibilities as she watched Briggs's threatening posture. She edged closer to Colt, keeping her voice barely above a breath. "The fire system. I saw an extinguisher back there. Create enough havoc, maybe trigger the alarms." Colt gave an almost imperceptible nod, his jaw set with understanding. They needed noise and confusion, not a direct confrontation. His paramedic training had taught him how to stay calm in crisis, how to assess and act without telegraphing intent. Briggs took another step forward, his bulk filling the narrow corridor. "Both of you, get back from that wall, now!" His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone used to being obeyed through intimidation. Colt shifted his weight, drawing Briggs's attention. "Look, we're all stuck here together. Maybe we should talk about how to handle this situation." His tone was measured, professional, the voice he used to calm accident victims. "Nothing to handle?" Briggs sneered. "You'll stay put till we sort things out." He gestured toward the deeper shadows of the corridor. Inez stood slightly apart, her keyring jingling nervously. The radio at her hip crackled with static, a reminder that communication with the outside world wasn't completely cut off. Her eyes met Rhea's, showing fear but also determination. Rhea remembered passing the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall near the corridor's bend. It wasn't far, maybe 30 feet back, but getting there meant moving away from Toby, even if temporarily. The thought made her stomach clench. The puppy pressed against her legs, sensing her tension. His earlier fearfulness had transformed into steady vigilance. She reached down to scratch his ears, using the motion to mask her whispered words to Colt. "Keep him talking. I need 2 minutes." Colt stepped forward, positioning himself to command Briggs's attention. "You said you do foreclosure cleanouts? That must be interesting work." His casual tone belied the alertness in his stance. Briggs's face twisted in suspicion, but he took the bait. "What's it to you?" "Professional curiosity. I'm a paramedic. Seen my share of foreclosure situations. Hard times make people do desperate things." While Colt engaged Briggs, Rhea began easing backward, one slow step at a time. The puppy moved with her, staying close but quiet. Each step felt like an eternity, each shadow a potential betrayal. "Had a call last month," Colt continued, his voice steady and conversational. "Guy barricaded himself in his foreclosed house. Took hours to talk him down." Briggs snorted. "Soft approach. I just changed the locks, dumped their junk. Not my problem if they can't pay bills." Rhea was halfway to the extinguisher now. The emergency lights cast weird shadows, making distance hard to judge. She could still hear the faint hum of the HVAC system behind the wall. Somewhere back there, Toby was waiting, counting on them to find a way. Inez had drifted closer to the unit's entrance, her keys a quiet symphony of potential. Her radio occasionally sputtered, someone trying to make contact. She kept her movements small, unremarkable, but her presence helped divide Briggs's attention. "Must see all kinds of things people leave behind," Colt prompted, maintaining the dialogue. "Yeah, well, some things are worth keeping." Briggs's smirk carried an ugly edge. Other things need to stay lost. Rhea reached the bend in the corridor. The red canister was there, mounted at chest height. Her fingers curled around its cold metal handle. Now she just needed the right moment, when the chaos would work for them instead of against them. She thought of Toby tapping his brave code through the wall, of the puppy chewing through restraints to find help. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage created the biggest chances for change. She took a deep breath and tightened her grip on the extinguisher. The puppy's ears suddenly pricked forward. Above them, something in the ceiling groaned, pipes or ducts shifting in the darkness. Briggs's head snapped up at the sound, and in that moment of divided attention, their window for action opened. Time compressed into crystal-clear fragments of decision. They needed noise and confusion. They needed a chance. Most of all, they needed to get that boy out of the dark space where he'd been hidden. The cold metal of the fire extinguisher felt heavy in Rhea's trembling hands as she crept toward the sprinkler valve housing. Her shoes squeaked against the wet concrete floor, and she froze at each sound, heart hammering in her chest. The puppy stayed close to her legs, his small body pressed against her as if lending her strength, his warm fur a stark contrast to the sterile chill of the storage facility. Rhea could feel his rapid heartbeat matching her own, both of them prey animals in this moment, hunting something much larger than themselves. "Come on," she whispered, adjusting her grip on the extinguisher. Years of walking past similar systems at the grocery store had taught her what to look for. The central valve that would trigger the building's emergency protocols. The red metal housing stuck out from the wall like a beacon of hope, its industrial paint chipped at the edges, revealing layers of previous colors underneath. She glanced over her shoulder, the weight of what she was about to do settling in her stomach like a stone. Voices echoed from around the corner. Briggs's gruff tone mixed with Colt's steady responses, buying her precious seconds. She could picture Colt standing his ground, keeping the larger man distracted while she worked. Briggs's voice carried that undercurrent of barely contained violence she'd recognized from the moment they'd been trapped. Yet Colt's replies remained measured, a dam holding back the flood of Briggs's temper. "Just checking the maintenance log like I told you," she heard Colt say, his voice carrying just enough confidence to sound believable. "Standard procedure when I'm called to a facility." Rhea took a deep breath and lifted the extinguisher above her head. The weight made her arms shake, muscles burning with the effort. But she thought of the gentle tapping behind that wall. A child waiting in darkness, hoping someone would find him. A child who had probably given up hope days ago. Her muscles steadied as determination replaced fear, her jaw clenching tight. With all her strength, she swung the extinguisher into the valve housing. The crash echoed through the corridor like a gunshot, metal striking metal with a sickening crunch. For a split second, nothing happened, just the hollow, ringing aftermath of impact hanging in the air. Her stomach dropped. Had she failed? Then chaos erupted. The emergency system screamed to life with a deafening shriek that clawed at her eardrums. Bright white strobes began pulsing from the ceiling, turning the dim corridor into a disorienting disco of light and shadow, each flash illuminating the terror on her face. The klaxon wail bounced off the concrete walls, so loud it made her teeth rattle and her skull vibrate with each pulse. "What the?" she heard Briggs shout from around the corner, his voice cracking with sudden panic. Water burst from the ceiling sprinklers in an icy deluge, quickly soaking everything around her. Rhea gasped as the cold water hit her skin, plastering her hair to her face and neck. The puppy yelped and shook his fur, sending droplets flying in a glittering arc under the strobe lights. Through the cascade, Rhea saw the heavy rolling gates at the corridor ends begin to rise automatically, emergency protocols forcing them open to allow evacuation. The massive metal doors groaned as they retracted upward, revealing glimpses of the outside world they'd been cut off from. She fumbled for her phone, hands slippery with water, fingers numb with adrenaline. The screen flickered to life, water droplets distorting the display as she navigated to the camera app. She started recording just as Vince appeared at the control room window, his previously composed demeanor shattered. His face was contorted with rage as he slammed his fists against buttons and switches, his expensive watch glinting with each flash of the emergency lights. "Override it!" he screamed, voice barely audible over the alarms, spittle flying from his mouth. "Briggs, get that gate down now! We can't let anyone see!" "The system's locked out!" Briggs shouted back, his typical bullying confidence replaced with visible fear. "It's hardwired to the fire department. I can't stop it." Rhea's hands were shaking, but she kept filming, water streaming down the back of the phone case. The camera captured it all: Vince's furious face, the veins standing out on his forehead, the unit number clearly visible on the wall behind him, his increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of the building's systems. In the flashing lights, his face transformed from businessman to predator and back again with each pulse. "Get rid of the evidence," Vince yelled, inadvertently confirming their whole setup on video, his finger jabbing frantically toward the storage unit. "Clear out 114 before anyone—" Rhea backed away from the corner, still recording. Water streamed down her face, dripping from her chin and eyelashes, but she didn't dare lower the phone. Every second of footage was another nail in their coffin, another piece of evidence that would be impossible to explain away. The surreal scene played out on her phone screen. Men who had seemed so powerful minutes ago, now reduced to panicking figures in a trap of their own making. The puppy barked sharply, alerting her to movement, and she heard running footsteps approaching, splashing through the growing puddles on the floor. She pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. But it was Inez who appeared, keys jangling at her hip and radio crackling with static, her practical shoes squeaking on the wet floor as she rushed toward Rhea. "Police are already on their way," Inez said, wiping water from her eyes with one hand while keeping a firm grip on her master keys with the other. "The system automatically notifies them. Fire department too. There's nowhere for them to run now." Despite the chaos, There was a glint of satisfaction in Inez's eyes. A storage manager finally able to solve the mystery that had been nagging at her conscience. The klaxons continued their ear-splitting wail, a constant reminder that systems larger than any of them were now in motion. Through the strobing lights and falling water, Rhea could see people beginning to gather outside the building's glass doors, drawn by the commotion. Curious faces pressed against the windows, phones already out and recording. The criminals' careful plan was unraveling in a cascade of water and warning lights, their secrecy stripped away by emergency protocols they hadn't counted on, by systems designed precisely for moments when something needed to be exposed. Rhea kept her phone steady, documenting everything despite her shivering body. The footage would show exactly what happened here, not just implications and suspicions, but clear evidence of their desperate attempts to maintain control. With every passing second, their chances of escaping consequences diminished, washed away like the water streaming down the corridors and swirling into drains at their feet, carrying away the last of their secrets. Water cascaded from the sprinklers as Rhea hurried back toward Unit 114, her shoes splashing through growing puddles. The emergency lights cast wild shadows that danced across the concrete walls. Behind her, the sound of heavy bolt cutters clanked against metal as Inez worked to secure their escape route. The puppy bounded ahead of her, his wet paws leaving tiny prints on the floor. He seemed more urgent now, if that was possible, practically vibrating with nervous energy as they reached the storage unit. The harsh fluorescent emergency lighting made everything look stark and unreal, like a scene from a nightmare. Inside Unit 114, water streamed down the walls in thin rivulets. The puppy made a beeline for a stack of plastic storage totes pushed against the back wall, pawing at them and whining. His behavior was different now, not the frantic barking from before, but something more focused, more insistent. "Help me with these," Rhea called to Inez, who had followed her in. Together they began dragging the heavy totes aside. They were filled with what felt like books or papers, each one requiring significant effort to move. The puppy darted between their legs, alternating between helping push with his nose and checking the wall behind them. As they cleared the space, Rhea's hands found a slight irregularity in the wall, a thin panel, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Her fingers traced the edges, searching for purchase. The drywall felt different here, newer maybe, like it had been recently installed. "There's got to be a way in," she muttered, pressing against different spots. The puppy whined and scratched at one particular section. Following his lead, Rhea dug her fingers into a barely perceptible seam and pulled. Nothing happened at first. She repositioned her grip, ignoring the way the rough edges bit into her skin, and pulled harder. Water ran down her arms as she strained against the panel. Finally, with a sudden crack, it gave way. A rush of cold air hit her face, the mechanical breath of an HVAC system. The void behind the wall was pitch black, but she could feel the air movement. The space smelled of dust and fear. "Toby?" she called softly into the darkness, trying to keep her voice calm and steady despite her racing heart. "Toby, are you in there? We're here to help you." For a moment, only the sound of running water and distant alarms filled the air. Then, a shuffle in the darkness. A slight movement. "It's okay," Rhea continued, reaching her hand into the void. "The puppy led us to you. We're going to get you out of here." Something brushed against her outstretched fingers, a small, tentative touch. Then tiny fingers wrapped around her hand, cold but gripping with desperate strength. "That's it," she encouraged, her voice thick with emotion. "Come on, sweetie, let's get you out of there." She pulled gently, and a small figure emerged from the darkness. Toby was pale and dusty, his light brown hair matted against his head. His wide eyes blinked in the harsh emergency lighting as Rhea helped him climb through the opening. The moment Toby's feet touched the wet floor, the puppy erupted with joy. He wiggled his entire body, tail wagging so hard it seemed in danger of flying off. He jumped up, putting his paws on Toby's chest and covering the boy's face with frantic, happy licks. A tiny laugh escaped Toby's throat, the first sound she'd heard him make. His arms went around the puppy's neck, burying his face in the wet fur. The dog had never forgotten his friend, had led them here with singular purpose, and now his mission was complete. "You're safe now," Rhea assured him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. She could feel him trembling beneath her touch, whether from cold or emotion or both. The sprinklers continued their steady downpour as Colt appeared in the doorway. He was breathing hard, his face showing signs of the scuffle with Briggs, but his eyes were alert and focused. He positioned himself to watch the hallway while keeping them in sight, ready to protect them if needed. "How is he?" Colt asked, voice tight with concern. "He's here. He's alive," Rhea answered, keeping her hand on Toby's shoulder. The boy hadn't let go of the puppy, and the puppy seemed equally determined to stay pressed against him. Through the ongoing chaos of alarms and water, through the frightening uncertainty of the last few hours, they had found what they were looking for. A small boy, hidden away in the dark, who might never have been found if not for a determined puppy who refused to give up on his friend. The wail of approaching sirens filtered through the storage facility's walls, still distant but growing stronger with each passing moment. Water continued cascading from the sprinklers overhead, creating shallow, expanding puddles on the concrete floor that reflected the pulsing emergency lights in crimson ripples. The steady drumming of water against metal doors and concrete created a strange, hollow soundtrack to their standoff. Briggs's massive frame filled the corridor, his shaved head glistening with water droplets that traced paths along the scar on his jawline. His work boots squelched against the wet floor as he advanced, shoulders hunched forward like a predator. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Toby clutching the puppy, and his face twisted with rage, nostrils flaring. "You've got to be kidding me," he snarled, taking a menacing step forward, fists clenching at his sides. "A damn kid in his mutt? This is what ruins everything?" Colt shifted his stance, planting his feet wider apart, placing himself more firmly between Briggs and the others. His left eye was already swelling from their earlier confrontation, a dark purple bruise forming along his cheekbone. Water streamed down his face, mingling with the blood at the corner of his mouth. Despite his injuries, his shoulders remained square, his hands steady at his sides, ready to react. The paramedic who had spent his career saving lives wasn't about to let anyone past him now. Down the hall, Vince's cursing echoed from the control room, bouncing off the metal walls. The harsh sound of his fist hitting metal punctuated his increasingly desperate attempts to override the emergency systems. "Get them!" he shouted through the glass, his normally slick appearance now disheveled, his expensive watch glinting under the emergency lights. "Don't let them leave. Do whatever you have to do, Briggs." Rhea pressed Toby further behind her, feeling his small body trembling against her back. She kept one protective hand firmly on his shoulder while holding her phone up with the other, ignoring how her fingers had gone numb with cold and fear. She swept the camera across Unit 114, methodically documenting everything. The scattered moving. Blankets now soaked with sprinkler water, the strips of duct tape still stuck to the wall, the half-full cooler knocked on its side with its contents spilled across the concrete. She made sure to capture the torn panel at the back, the dark void beyond it where they'd found Toby huddled in fear. Every detail would matter to investigators, every piece of evidence crucial to ensuring these men faced justice. "It's over," Colt said firmly, his voice carrying despite the cacophony of alarms and rushing water. "Police are almost here. Don't make this worse for yourself. You know they'll add assaulting us to whatever else you're going down for." The puppy, fur plastered to his small frame by the relentless sprinklers, took up position in front of Rhea and Toby. His hackles rose along his spine, creating a ridge of defiance, and a low, continuous growl rumbled in his chest. Water dripped from his muzzle as he bared his teeth. For such a small dog, his presence felt enormous, a final fierce line of defense protecting the boy he'd worked so hard to save, the boy whose lonely tapping had guided them here. Briggs's eyes darted between them and the exit, calculation warring with fury on his face. A vein pulsed at his temple, and his hands clenched into fists, knuckles white against reddened skin. "You think that mangy mutt scares me?" he sneered. But there was an edge of desperation in his voice now, a note of panic creeping in as the sirens drew closer. "I've handled worse than all of you put together." Water dripped from everyone's clothes, creating small rivers that merged with the growing puddles on the floor. Their shoes and pants were soaked through, adding weight to every movement. The emergency lights cast strange, distorted shadows along the walls, making the scene feel almost surreal, like something from a fever dream. Yet the danger remained very real as Briggs took another step forward, testing Colt's resolve, his heavy work boots splashing in the rising water. Colt didn't budge, not even a millimeter. Despite his exhaustion and injuries, he stood like an immovable wall between the others and harm. His jaw tightened, muscles working beneath the bruised skin, a quiet determination hardening his hazel eyes. He'd been protecting people his whole career as a paramedic, rushing into danger while others fled from it. This was just another form of the same calling, perhaps the most important one he'd ever answered. Behind them, Toby's fingers twisted in the puppy's wet fur, seeking comfort in the animal that had never forgotten him, that had somehow led these strangers to his prison. The boy's eyes remained wide and watchful, taking in everything, missing nothing. The dog responded by pressing closer to the child, his growl steady and unwavering. His small body trembled, but whether from cold or adrenaline, it was impossible to tell. The loyalty in his stance was unmistakable. He would not abandon his boy again. Rhea kept filming, her hand remarkably steady despite her racing heart and the water running down her arm. Each second of footage could be crucial evidence: the torn panel, the restraints half hidden under soaked blankets, the men's reactions to being discovered. She captured Vince's continued attempts to regain control of the facility's systems, his silhouette visible through the control room window as he frantically worked the panels, occasionally slamming his palm against them in frustration. His neat appearance had dissolved. His slicked-back hair now hung in wet strands around his face. "You grocery store nobodies should have minded your own business," Briggs growled, shifting his weight forward. "Nobody would have missed him anyway. Nobody important." The sirens grew louder. Their urgent cry promising help was nearly there, perhaps turning into the facility's entrance now. But in these final, tension-filled moments before their arrival, the corridor remained a battleground, a space where anything could still happen. Briggs' fury seemed to spike with each passing second, his options narrowing as the reality of exposure and capture settled in. The look in his eyes suggested he might try to bull his way through, consequences be damned, one last desperate attempt to escape what was coming. The thunder of boots echoed through the corridor as police officers poured in from both ends, their flashlight beams cutting through the rain of sprinkler water, creating prisms of light against the concrete walls. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" The command rang out, sharp and authoritative, bouncing off the narrow hallway. Briggs's shoulders slumped as reality crashed in, the tough facade crumbling like sand. Water cascaded down his burly frame as he slowly raised his hands, droplets streaming from his elbows and catching the emergency lights. 2 officers immediately moved to secure him, their movements practiced and efficient. The metallic click of handcuffs barely registered over the facility's blaring alarms that pulsed through the building with deafening insistence. "This is garbage," Briggs spat as the cuffs tightened around his thick wrists, biting into his skin. "You got nothing but some crazy woman's story." His protests echoed off the wet walls, desperation creeping into his voice. The scar along his jawline seemed more pronounced now, twisted with rage as officers led him away, his heavy boots dragging through puddles of accumulating water. More shouts erupted from the direction of the control room, sharp commands cutting through the chaos. 2 officers dragged Vince out, his expensive watch glinting under the emergency lights as he struggled against their grip. His neat hair now hung in wet strands across his forehead, the carefully maintained appearance unraveling with each second. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, his earlier confidence crumbling into panicked desperation. "I run a legitimate business." "Save it," one officer cut him off, securing his wrists behind his back with a swift, practiced motion that left no room for argument. Rhea stepped forward through the curtain of falling water, her clothes clinging to her frame, her practical brown hair plastered against her neck. She held her phone extended toward the sergeant who appeared to be in charge, her hand trembling slightly but her voice steady despite her soaked clothes and bone-deep exhaustion. "I have everything documented," she said, blue eyes clear and determined. "The receipt from his car, photos of the unit's contents, and video of him trying to trap us inside." She swiped through the evidence with a wet finger, showing the timestamp on the receipt, the damning images of duct tape and restraints, and the footage of Vince at the control panel, his face clearly visible as he issued orders. "He's on video giving orders to keep us from leaving," she added, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And you can clearly see his face. He ordered Briggs to make sure we never left." Vince's protests died in his throat as he realized his own words had betrayed him. The blood drained from his face under the flashing lights, leaving him ashen and small in the officer's grip. Inez stepped forward, water dripping from her short, natural curls, her glasses speckled with droplets. Her practical shoes squeaked loudly on the wet floor as she approached with the authority of someone who knew every inch of the building. She held up her ring of master keys and a thick, water-spotted logbook with unwavering confidence. "I have the access records right here," she stated firmly, pushing her glasses higher on her nose. "Shows when the unit was rented, every entry and exit, and all suspicious after-hours activity. I can also provide the security camera feeds from the main office dating back 6 months. Nothing happens in my facility that I don't eventually find out about." Officers quickly spread through the space like a coordinated machine, securing the scene with practiced efficiency. One crouched by the torn panel in Unit 114, camera flashing repeatedly as he photographed the hidden crawl space and the makeshift bed inside. Another collected the duct tape and restraints as evidence, carefully bagging each item and marking them with precise labels, preserving the chain of custody that would ensure conviction. Colt finally allowed himself to relax, his tall frame sagging as he leaned against the damp concrete wall, his broad shoulders dropping with relief. Water trickled down his face in rivulets, mixing with the blood from his split lip and staining his collar. The adrenaline that had kept him standing through the confrontation began to ebb away like a retreating tide, making his injuries throb with renewed intensity. His hazel eyes, however, remained watchful, tracking Toby's every movement with protective vigilance. Through it all, 8-year-old Toby remained glued to his rescuer, his small fingers twisted tightly in the puppy's wet fur, his knuckles white with the effort. His thin body trembled, whether from cold or fear or relief, impossible to tell. The dog stayed perfectly still beneath his touch, as if understanding the boy's desperate need for an anchor in the chaos. His earlier protective growls had subsided into gentle, reassuring whines, his whole body pressed firmly against Toby's legs, providing warmth and stability in a world suddenly turned upside down. A female officer approached them gently, sidestepping puddles and evidence markers, crouching to Toby's eye level with careful, non-threatening movements. "Hey there, brave boy," she said softly, her voice a calm contrast to the continued commotion around them. "Your parents are on their way. They've been looking for you non-stop. Would you like to get checked out by the paramedics while we wait? They can make sure you're okay." Toby nodded, but didn't loosen his grip on the puppy's fur, his wide, frightened eyes communicating what his voice couldn't. The dog looked up at him with complete devotion, tail wagging slightly despite his own exhaustion, muddy paws firmly planted as if promising never to leave. "The dog stays with him," Rhea said quickly, stepping forward as she noticed Toby's anxiety spike at the thought of separation, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "He's the one who led us here in the first place. He's the reason we found Toby at all. That dog wouldn't stop trying to tell us something was wrong." The officer nodded, understanding, compassion softening her professional demeanor, and Toby's shoulders relaxed slightly at this small victory. Together they moved toward the building's entrance, a strange procession of the soaked and weary, the puppy padding faithfully alongside, leaving a trail of wet paw prints on the concrete like breadcrumbs marking their path to freedom. Behind them, the evidence collection continued with methodical precision. Officers documented every detail of the storage unit and the hidden crawl space, measuring, photographing, and collecting fibers and fingerprints. The sprinklers finally shut off with a sputtering gasp, leaving only the steady drip of water from the ceiling and the focused movements of law enforcement doing their work. What had started with a puppy's desperate barking at a white sedan had ended with an ironclad case, a receipt, a hidden room, damning video footage, and 2 men in handcuffs. The truth had been there all along, wrapped in a small dog's determination to be heard and one woman's courage to listen when no one else would. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Rhea sat on a worn bench, the vinyl cracked beneath her from years of anxious visitors. She watched Toby reunite with his aunt across the room, unable to look away from the raw emotion unfolding before her. The woman had tears streaming down her face as she held him close, her shoulders shaking with relief, her fingers repeatedly brushing through his matted hair as if reassuring herself he was real. The puppy, who hadn't left Toby's side since their rescue, wagged his tail gently, pressed against the boy's leg, his amber eyes vigilant despite his exhaustion. "Thank you," Toby's aunt managed between sobs, looking across at Rhea with red-rimmed eyes. Her voice cracked with emotion. "Thank you for believing him." She nodded toward the dog, who perked his ears at the attention, his mud-streaked coat still showing the marks of his desperate escape. Detective Santos approached with a clipboard and a gentle smile, her badge catching the harsh overhead light. "Ms. Calder, we need your official statement now." She gestured toward a nearby interview room with its institutional green walls. "Don't worry, the puppy can come too. He's earned that right, I'd say." As they settled into the small room with its metal table and uncomfortable chairs, Santos clicked her pen and adjusted her glasses. The sound of the busy station filtered through the thin walls. "Walk me through everything, starting with the traffic incident. Leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." Rhea took a deep breath and detailed each moment. The white sedan that had nearly hit her, Toby's desperate face in the window, the emergency alert on her phone hours later, the chemical-soaked rag she'd found, and the storage facility receipt that had led them to Ravenside. Her voice strengthened as she described Colt's unwavering help, Inez's crucial cooperation despite the rules, and those desperate minutes trapped in the corridor with Briggs taunting them through the door. The detective nodded as she documented the sequence, her pen scratching steadily across the paper, particularly interested in the video evidence from Ria's phone, where Vince's voice was clearly identifiable. "This is excellent work," Santos said, carefully logging Ria's phone into evidence with proper documentation, sealing it in a marked bag. "The chain of custody is clear, and your footage gives us Vince's own words admitting to the setup. Between this and the physical evidence from Unit 114, the restraints, the food wrappers, the crawl space modifications, we have an airtight case. They won't wriggle out of this." While Ria signed her statement, her hand slightly trembling from leftover adrenaline, Officer Chen appeared with a stack of papers, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. "About the dog," he said, gesturing toward the puppy who was now dozing at Ria's feet. "He was technically evidence in a criminal case, but given his role in the rescue, we've cleared him for immediate adoption. If you're interested." He let the suggestion hang in the air. The puppy looked up at Ria with those knowing amber eyes, suddenly alert as if understanding exactly what was being discussed. Something in that gaze melted her heart all over again, the connection immediate and undeniable. "Yes," she said without hesitation, her hand automatically, reaching down to stroke his dusty fur. "Though I think he's already chosen me, hasn't he?" As she filled out the adoption paperwork, the bureaucratic words blurring before her tired eyes, Chen smiled. "What will you call him?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Ria thought about how the dog had refused to give up, how he'd chewed through restraints to escape, how he'd led them straight to Toby like a compass pointing true north, despite his injuries and fear. "Ranger," she decided, the name feeling right on her tongue, "because he guided us home when everyone else had given up." Ranger's tail thumped against the linoleum floor, as if approving his new name, the sound oddly comforting in the sterile room. He curled up at her feet, exhausted but content, while she completed the forms, his warm presence a reminder of everything they'd accomplished. Her phone buzzed with a text from Colt. She opened it to find a photo he must have taken during their ordeal. She was standing in the storage facility corridor, covered in dust and water, with determination etched across her face. Despite everything, she was smiling slightly, caught in a moment of pure purpose. Looking at it now, she barely recognized herself. This woman with fierce eyes who had trusted her instincts and refused to back down when everyone told her she was wrong. The grocery clerk who had transformed into something else entirely when it mattered. Through the interview room's window, she could see the booking area where Vince and Briggs sat in handcuffs on separate benches, their earlier bravado replaced by grim resignation. Vince's slicked-back hair had fallen across his forehead, his expensive watch now tagged as evidence. Briggs hunched forward, his burly frame somehow diminished without the power to intimidate. Justice felt solid here. Not an abstract concept, but a tangible reality of consequences and accountability for those who preyed on the vulnerable. Toby appeared in the doorway with his aunt, his thin frame still vibrating with tension. Ranger immediately lifted his head, his entire body alert at the boy's presence. Can I say goodbye?" the boy asked quietly, his voice hoarse from disuse during his captivity. "Actually," Ria smiled, watching hope flicker across his exhausted face. "Ranger lives with me now. You can visit him whenever you want. I think he'd like that." Toby's face lit up for the first time since his rescue, color returning to his pale cheeks. He knelt beside Ranger, who gently licked his cheek, the gesture so tender it brought tears to Ria's eyes. "Thank you for finding me," he whispered into the dog's fur, his small fingers threading through the matted coat. I knew you would. Colt joined them, his eye starting to swell from Briggs's blow, but his smile warm and steady. He'd washed up but still wore the dust of their ordeal on his clothes. Quite a day, he said, leaning against the doorframe, wincing slightly from his bruised ribs. No, I always thought you were stronger than you gave yourself credit for. Seems I was right all along. Rhea felt something settle in her chest, a quiet certainty that hadn't been there before, replacing the chronic doubt that had shadowed her for years. She had a partner who showed up when it mattered, a dog who had chosen her as his person, and a newfound trust in her own judgment that felt unshakable. The locked door at home would mean safety now, not fear. And if Ranger barked at something that seemed wrong, she would listen without question. We did it together, she said, reaching down to scratch behind Ranger's ears, feeling the soft warmth beneath the grime. The puppy leaned into her touch, sighing contentedly as if he'd finally found exactly where he belonged after so much struggle. His eyes closed in complete trust. Detective Santos returned with the last of the paperwork, her movements efficient but kind. Everything's logged and filed properly, she confirmed, placing the final forms before Rhea. The evidence chain is solid, and the DA's office is already preparing charges. You've given us everything we need to make this case stick. That boy is alive because you refuse to look away. Don't ever forget that.